My SIL terrorized our neighborhood for years. She didn't know I was the HOA president. The certified letter sat on my kitchen counter like a ticking bomb, and I couldn't stop staring at it. Notice of HOA violation, 48-hour compliance required. My signature was right there at the bottom, crisp and official as the HOA president, but the recipient address made my stomach flutter with nervous energy. 2847, Maple Grove Drive. Vanessa's house. My sister-in-law had no idea what was coming. I'd spent 3 years watching her terrorize our neighborhood like some suburban warlord. 3 years of elderly Mrs. Patterson crying on her front porch because Vanessa screamed at her about dandelions. 3 years of the Morrison family tiptoeing around their own backyard because Vanessa called the cops every time their 8-year-old laughed too loudly on the swing set. 3 years of Vanessa filing 18, I counted, frivolous complaints with animal control because she decided our neighbors' well-loved pets were nuisances. But Vanessa made one crucial miscalculation when she moved to Maple Grove Estates. She assumed I was just another victim to steamroll. The irony was almost poetic. Last month's HOA election had been conducted by private ballot, and somehow our little neighborhood tyrant never bothered to ask who won. She'd been too busy sending nastygrams to the Hendersons about their garden gnomes being aesthetically offensive and threatening to sue the Chens because their teenage son's friends parked on the street during his birthday party. My phone buzzed. A text from my husband David, *, Mom wants to know if we're still coming to dinner Sunday. Vanessa's cooking. *. I snorted. Of course she was. David's sister loved playing the perfect hostess when it suited her image, never mind that she'd spent Tuesday morning screaming at our mail carrier for walking across her precious lawn. Poor guy was just trying to deliver packages. The violation notice detailed exactly what I documented during my casual evening walk yesterday, her fence extension that violated the setback requirements by 14 inches, the unauthorized gravel driveway expansion, and my personal favorite, the decorative fountain that exceeded the maximum decibel level she herself had lobbied to implement last year. The same rule she'd weaponized against 3 different families with water features. Vanessa's fountain measured 47 decibels. The limit was 45. I'd used a professional sound meter, naturally. Everything had to be absolutely bulletproof. The beautiful thing about HOA regulations is their blind impartiality. Rules are rules, whether you're a sweet grandmother trying to grow tomatoes or a neighborhood bully who thinks screaming at children is acceptable conflict resolution. Vanessa had spent months meticulously researching every possible violation she could pin on our neighbors, building a paper trail of complaints longer than my grocery lists. She just never thought to check her own property against those same standards. My laptop chimed with an email from our property management company, *, compliance inspection scheduled for Friday, 2 p.m., per HOA president request. *. I'd given Vanessa exactly 48 hours to fix everything, which was generous considering she typically gave people 24 hours before threatening legal action. The fence alone would require a contractor and probably 2 days of work, assuming she could even get someone out there on short notice. Through my kitchen window, I could see her house perfectly. The same vantage point where I'd watched her reduce 3 different neighbors to tears over the past year. Where I'd seen her call the police because the college kid next door had friends over for a quiet barbecue. Tomorrow morning, that certified letter would arrive. And Vanessa would finally understand how it feels to be on the receiving end. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:23 a.m., and I knew before looking through the peephole that it would be her. Vanessa stood on my front porch clutching the certified letter, her perfectly styled blonde hair already disheveled despite the early hour. Her face had that particular shade of red I'd seen her turn when the Patterson sprinkler system accidentally hit her car last month. "We need to talk," she said the moment I opened the door, waving the notice like a weapon. "This is absolutely ridiculous. There's been some kind of mistake." I stepped aside to let her in, fighting to keep my expression neutral. "What's wrong? You look upset." "Upset?" Her voice climbed an octave. "Some power-hungry busybody on the HOA board is targeting me. Look at this nonsense, they're claiming my fence is 14 inches over the property line. 14 inches. As if anyone actually measures that precisely. I did. With a surveyor's tape measure I borrowed from my neighbor Jim, who used to work in construction. But I just nodded sympathetically and poured myself coffee with steady hands. They want me to tear down a section and rebuild it in 48 hours, Vanessa continued, pacing my kitchen like a caged animal. Do you have any idea how much contractors charge for emergency work? I called 6 companies yesterday, the cheapest quote was $2,800, and that's if they can even fit me in by tomorrow. The irony was delicious. Last spring, she'd forced the Hendersons to remove their vegetable garden with 24 hours notice because it extended 6 inches beyond the approved landscaping zone. Mrs. Henderson had spent 3 months nurturing those tomato seedlings. That does seem fast, I agreed carefully. Did you try calling the HOA to request an extension? Vanessa's laugh was bitter. I left 4 messages yesterday. 4. No one's returned my calls. It's like they want me to fail compliance. She slumped into one of my kitchen chairs, suddenly looking defeated. I don't understand what I did to deserve this. I've been nothing but helpful to this community. I nearly choked on my coffee. Helpful. This was the woman who'd called animal control on the Morrison's golden retriever because he barked, once, at a squirrel. The same woman who'd threatened to sue Mrs. Chen for allowing her roses to grow through the fence slats. Maybe someone filed a complaint. I suggested, refilling my mug to buy time. But who would do that? Vanessa's eyes narrowed. I've been so careful to maintain good relationships with everyone. Just last month I helped the Pattersons understand why their wind chimes were disturbing the neighborhood peace. Helped. She'd screamed at 78-year-old Mr. Patterson until he removed the chimes his late wife had given him for their anniversary. My phone buzzed with a text from David, *, running late for work. Can you swing by Mom's later to drop off her prescription? V's been calling her all morning freaking out about some HOA thing. *. Perfect. Vanessa was already involving family, which meant Sunday dinner was going to be a minefield. David's mother, Patricia, had a soft spot for her daughter's dramatic tendencies and a talent for guilt-tripping anyone she perceived as being unfair to Vanessa. I need to figure out who the HOA president is, Vanessa muttered, scrolling through her phone. This has to be personal. Normal people don't measure fence setbacks with rulers. Actually, I'd used a professional surveyor's tape, but who was counting? The violation notice should have contact information, I offered helpfully. She held up the letter, squinting at the signature line. It just says HOA president with some illegible scrawl. These people are cowards, hiding behind anonymous authority. Anonymous. I was sitting 3 feet away from her, but somehow I'd become invisible in her self-centered universe. This was going to be even more interesting than I'd planned. Vanessa spent the next hour turning my kitchen into her personal war room, spreading HOA documents across my table like battle plans. She'd apparently printed every regulation from the community website, armed with 3 different colored highlighters and a determination that would have been admirable if it weren't so hypocritical. Look at this, she said, jabbing at a highlighted section. The fence setback rule was only implemented 18 months ago. There should be grandfather clauses for existing structures. She looked up at me with desperate eyes. You're good with legal stuff, right? Could you help me draft an appeal? The audacity was breathtaking. This was the same woman who told the Hendersons that ignorance of regulations isn't an excuse when they'd unknowingly violated the garden placement rules. But I nodded thoughtfully, leaning over to read the section she'd highlighted. It says here that structures built after the rule implementation date must comply, I pointed out gently. When did you install your fence extension? Vanessa's face went pale. March. This past March. 6 months after the setback requirements went into effect. She'd actually researched the regulations extensively while building her case against the Pattersons' wind chimes, which meant she knew exactly what she was doing when she expanded that fence. Maybe they'll consider partial compliance. I suggested, though we both knew the answer. Vanessa had never accepted partial compliance from anyone else. My doorbell rang again at 8:47 a.m., and this time it was Mrs. Patterson herself, looking smaller and more fragile than usual. At 78, she barely reached my shoulder, but her eyes held a steely determination I'd never seen before. I'm sorry to bother you, dear, she said, glancing past me to where Vanessa sat surrounded by papers. I heard Vanessa was here, and I wanted to speak with her. The temperature in my kitchen dropped 10 degrees. Vanessa straightened in her chair, immediately shifting into defensive mode. Mrs. Patterson. How nice to see you. Is it? The elderly woman stepped inside, clutching a folder against her chest. Because you told my grandson last week that I was a neighborhood menace who needed to be dealt with appropriately. He's 12 years old, Vanessa. He came home crying. I'd heard about this. Little Tommy Patterson had been riding his bike when Vanessa cornered him, apparently deciding that harassing children was an acceptable way to send messages to their grandparents. I was simply explaining community standards, Vanessa said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Mrs. Patterson opened her folder and pulled out a stack of printed emails. Community standards. Like when you reported my bird feeder for attracting vermin. Or when you claimed my newspaper delivery was creating excessive noise disturbance at 6 a.m. Those were legitimate concerns. Concerns. Mrs. Patterson's voice rose, and I saw 3 years of suppressed anger finally breaking free. You filed 17 complaints against me in 2 years. 17. My late husband planted that oak tree 40 years ago, and you wanted it removed because the leaves fell on your driveway. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. Property maintenance affects everyone's home values. My home value? Mrs. Patterson laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean the home I've owned since before you were born? The one where I raised 4 children and buried my husband of 53 years. You think I care about property values more than I care about his memory? The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of my wall clock. I'd never seen anyone stand up to Vanessa like this, and frankly, it was magnificent. Mrs. Patterson, Vanessa started, but the older woman held up her hand. I'm not finished. Yesterday, someone filed an HOA complaint about that monstrosity you call a fountain. The same day you tried to have my sprinkler system cited for water waste. Her smile was sharp. Funny how these things work out, isn't it? Vanessa's eyes went wide. You reported me. Oh, honey, Mrs. Patterson said sweetly. I reported everything. The silence that followed Mrs. Patterson's revelation was deafening. Vanessa's face cycled through 3 different shades of red before settling on a color I'd previously only seen on fire trucks. You reported everything. Vanessa's voice came out as a strangled whisper. Mrs. Patterson nodded serenely, settling into my 3rd kitchen chair like she owned the place. The fence extension that blocks natural light from my garden. The unauthorized driveway expansion that violates the pervious surface requirements. The fountain that runs until 11 p.m. every night, well past the noise ordinance cutoff. She counted off on her arthritic fingers with obvious satisfaction. Oh, and the storage shed you never got permits for. My coffee mug paused halfway to my lips. Storage shed. I'd missed that one during my evening reconnaissance. How did you even know about half those regulations? Vanessa demanded. Honey, you've been quoting HOA rules at me for 2 years. I wrote them all down. Mrs. Patterson patted her folder. Very educational, actually. Did you know that decorative lighting requires approval if it's visible from neighboring properties? Your fairy lights are lovely, but that string of Edison bulbs along your back fence needed a permit. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. Mrs. Patterson had just revealed at least 4 violations I hadn't even documented yet. This is harassment, Vanessa finally managed. Filing false reports is. False. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows shot up. Oh dear, I hope you're not suggesting I lied. That would be quite an accusation to make without proof. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The same kind of accusation you made about my grandson's bicycle being an unlicensed vehicle creating safety hazards. I remembered that incident. Tommy had been riding his bike with friends when Vanessa called the police, claiming they were loitering with intent to damage property. The responding officer had to explain to a grown woman why children riding bicycles in their own neighborhood wasn't a criminal offense. My phone buzzed with another text from David. Vanessa's been calling Mom every 20 minutes. She wants us to come over tonight instead of Sunday. Something about family emergency. Perfect. Because nothing said family emergency like finally facing consequences for 3 years of terrorizing senior citizens. I need to make some calls, Vanessa announced, gathering her papers with shaking hands. This whole situation is obviously a coordinated attack designed to force me out of the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson tilted her head thoughtfully. Force you out? Heavens, no. I just want you to follow the same rules you've been demanding everyone else follow. She smiled sweetly. You know, community standards. Vanessa's face darkened. Don't quote my words back at me. Why not? They're very good words. Very educational. Mrs. Patterson turned to me with twinkling eyes. Vanessa taught me that ignorance of regulations isn't an excuse and that property compliance is every resident's responsibility. Isn't that right, dear? The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. Every phrase Mrs. Patterson quoted was something Vanessa had said to other neighbors while bullying them into submission. Now her own weapons were being turned against her, and she was discovering how sharp they really were. I'm leaving, Vanessa announced, stuffing the violation notice into her purse. But this isn't over. I'm going to find out who's really behind this witch hunt. Mrs. Patterson waited until Vanessa reached my front door before calling out cheerfully, Oh, Vanessa. You might want to check on that garden gnome you've got hidden behind your garbage cans. I believe decorative lawn ornaments require approval from the Architectural Review Committee. The door slammed so hard my windows rattled. Mrs. Patterson turned to me with a grin that belonged on someone 60 years younger. I've been waiting 2 years to do that. Mrs. Patterson's grin faded as soon as Vanessa's car pulled out of my driveway, replaced by something that looked almost like guilt. She fidgeted with the handle of her folder, suddenly appearing every one of her 78 years. I hope I didn't overstep, she said quietly. Coming here like this, saying all those things. It's not like me to be so confrontational. I reached across the table and squeezed her weathered hand. Mrs. Patterson, you were magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. I just couldn't take it anymore. Her voice cracked slightly. When she cornered my Tommy last week, told him his grandmother was a problem that needed solving, that sweet boy came home asking if he should stop visiting me so much. Can you imagine? An 12-year-old worried that loving his grandmother too much might get me in trouble. My chest tightened. I'd known Vanessa was cruel, but targeting children crossed a line I hadn't even realized existed. What exactly did she say to him? Mrs. Patterson pulled out a small notebook, her handwriting shaky but determined. Tommy wrote it down when he got home, afraid he might forget the exact words. She told him, Your grandmother doesn't respect community standards, and children who enable bad behavior become problems themselves. The coffee turned to acid in my stomach. Enable bad behavior. Vanessa had essentially threatened a child for visiting his grandmother too often. That's when I decided to fight back, Mrs. Patterson continued. I spent 3 weeks walking the neighborhood at different times, documenting everything she's done to her property. Did you know she runs that fountain from 6 a.m. until 11:30 p.m. every single day? I timed it. You've been building a case for 3 weeks. Harold, my late husband, always said the best defense against a bully is meticulous record keeping. She opened her folder, revealing pages of handwritten notes, printed photographs, and timestamp logs. I photographed her fence extension from 6 different angles, measured the noise levels of that ridiculous fountain, and documented every single modification she's made without permits. The thoroughness was staggering. Mrs. Patterson had done more investigative work than most private detectives, all while enduring Vanessa's constant harassment. I flipped through her documentation, finding detailed logs of noise complaints, property modifications, and HOA rule violations dating back 18 months. Mrs. Patterson, this is incredible. But why didn't you file these complaints earlier? Her smile turned sad. Because I didn't think anyone would listen to a cranky old widow complaining about her neighbor. Vanessa's younger, prettier, more articulate. She has that way of making everything sound reasonable when she talks to authorities. She paused. But then I realized something important. What's that? I don't have to be likable to be right. My phone rang before I could respond. David's name flashed on the screen, and I could already hear the tension in his voice when I answered. Babe, we have a problem, he said without preamble. Mom just called. Vanessa's been at her house for the past hour, crying about some HOA conspiracy. She's convinced someone's targeting her specifically, and she wants the whole family to help her fight it. I glanced at Mrs. Patterson, who was pretending not to listen while reorganizing her meticulous documentation. What kind of help? She wants Dad to call his lawyer buddy, Mom to canvass the neighborhood asking who filed complaints, and she wants us to attend the next HOA meeting as character witnesses. David's sigh was audible. She's talking about hiring a private investigator to find out who's behind this coordinated attack. A private investigator. My stomach dropped. Professional investigators might dig deeper than Vanessa's amateur sleuthing, might uncover my role as HOA president before I was ready to reveal it. How serious is she about the PI? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Dead serious. She already called 2 firms this morning. One quoted her $1,500 for a basic neighborhood investigation. Mrs. Patterson looked up from her papers, eyebrows raised. I mouthed, private investigator, and watched her expression shift from curiosity to concern. This was escalating faster than I'd anticipated. What started as poetic justice was becoming a full-scale family crisis, and I was standing directly in the blast radius with a secret that could explode everything. David's concern about the private investigator gnawed at me all afternoon, but it was Mrs. Patterson's parting words that really stuck. Sometimes the right thing and the easy thing are completely different paths, dear. Choose carefully. By 3 p.m., I was second-guessing everything. My laptop sat open to the HOA management portal, cursor hovering over Vanessa's case file. One click could delay the compliance deadline. Another could withdraw the violations entirely. I could blame clerical errors, measurement mistakes, anything to defuse this situation before it destroyed Sunday dinners for the next decade. Then my doorbell rang again. This time it was Jim Chin, looking haggard in a way I'd never seen before. Jim was usually the picture of suburban composure, perfectly pressed khakis, methodical lawn maintenance, the kind of neighbor who organized block parties and remembered everyone's anniversary. Today he looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. I'm sorry to bother you, he started, then stopped, running his hands through his graying hair. Actually, no. I'm not sorry. I need to tell someone what's been happening before I lose my mind completely. I invited him in, noting the manila envelope clutched in his white-knuckled grip. It's about Vanessa, he said, settling heavily into the chair Mrs. Patterson had vacated hours earlier. She's been systematically harassing my family for 8 months, and I just found out why. My blood chilled. What do you mean? Jim opened his envelope and spread out a collection of printed emails, photographs, and what looked like legal documents. My son Kevin is 17, right? He's been dating Sarah Morrison, you know, from 3 streets over. Sweet kid, honor roll student, volunteers at the animal shelter. I nodded, remembering the girl. Blonde, always polite when I saw her walking the neighborhood dogs. Apparently Vanessa decided Kevin was loitering with criminal intent because he parks on the street when he visits Sarah. Jim's voice grew bitter. She's called the police on him 11 times in 4 months. 11 times. For parking legally on a public street. That's harassment, I said, though I knew Vanessa's pattern of weaponizing authority figures against anyone she disliked. It gets worse. Jim pulled out a formal-looking document. Last week, she filed a complaint with the county claiming Kevin was dealing drugs because teenagers sometimes gather at our house. The sheriff's department showed up Tuesday morning with a search warrant. My stomach dropped. Oh my God, Jim. They searched everything. Kevin's room, his car, our entire house. They found nothing because there was nothing to find, but the neighbors watched my 17-year-old son get handcuffed on our front lawn while deputies tore apart his bedroom. Jim's voice cracked. He's been accepted to 3 colleges. This could have destroyed his entire future. I stared at the search warrant, seeing Vanessa's neat signature on a sworn statement alleging ongoing drug distribution activities and suspicious gatherings of young adults. The level of malicious calculation required to file false drug accusations against a teenager was staggering, even for her. The deputy told me confidentially that they knew it was probably bogus, Jim continued. But they have to investigate when someone files sworn statements. Vanessa claimed she photographed evidence of drug transactions. What evidence? Jim pulled out printed photos that made my blood boil. They showed Kevin hugging Sarah goodbye after school, teenagers sharing snacks during a study group, and Kevin handing something to his younger cousin during a family barbecue. She claimed these photos showed drug deals, Jim said flatly. A goodbye hug became suspicious intimate contact suggesting substance exchange. Kids eating chips became consumption of suspicious substances. Kevin giving his cousin a birthday card became transfer of unmarked packages. The sheer vindictive creativity was breathtaking. Vanessa had turned normal teenage interactions into federal crimes through strategic photography and creative interpretation. Jim, this is beyond neighborhood disputes. This is criminal harassment. I know. He gathered the papers with shaking hands. I've been documenting everything, talking to lawyers, trying to figure out how to protect my family. Then this morning I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that someone finally filed HOA violations against her. My heart hammered against my ribs. I don't know who did it, Jim continued, but I wanted to thank them. And I wanted them to know that if Vanessa tries to retaliate or escalate this situation, she's going to find herself facing criminal charges for filing false police reports. He stood to leave, then turned back with eyes that held 3 years of suppressed fury. Whoever's holding her accountable, they're not just fighting for property compliance. They're fighting for every family she's terrorized, every kid she's traumatized, every elderly person she's reduced to tears. His voice was steel. Tell them not to back down. After Jim left, I sat in my empty kitchen staring at the HOA violation notice I'd drafted just yesterday. What had felt like clever justice 12 hours ago now seemed impossibly small compared to false drug accusations and traumatized teenagers. Vanessa hadn't just been filing noise complaints, she'd been systematically trying to destroy people's lives. My phone buzzed with a text from David, *, Mom's making her famous pot roast tonight. She wants us there by 6 to discuss this HOA situation as a family. Fair warning, Dad's already called his lawyer friend. *. Perfect. In 3 hours, I'd be sitting around Patricia's dining table while Vanessa played the victim and David's father strategized legal defenses for someone who'd filed false police reports against a 17-year-old. The thought made me physically nauseous. I pulled up the HOA management portal again, but this time I wasn't considering backing down. Instead, I started documenting everything Jim had told me, cross-referencing dates with my own observations. If Vanessa wanted to escalate this into a full investigation, she was going to discover that some secrets cut both ways. At 4:30, my doorbell rang for the 3rd time that day. Through the peephole, I saw Maria Santos from 2 blocks over, clutching a sleeping toddler and looking absolutely exhausted. I'd met Maria briefly at a neighborhood barbecue last summer, young mother, worked as a nurse, had twin 3-year-olds who were adorable but energetic. I'm so sorry to bother you, she whispered, clearly trying not to wake the little girl in her arms. Mrs. Patterson said you might be willing to listen. It's about Vanessa Chen, your sister-in-law. I invited her in, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands shook slightly from what looked like chronic sleep deprivation. I don't know what to do anymore, Maria said, settling into my kitchen chair while her daughter continued sleeping against her shoulder. Vanessa's been calling Child Protective Services on me for 6 months. 6 different reports claiming I'm neglecting my twins. My blood turned to ice water. What kind of reports? The first one claimed I was leaving them unattended because she saw them playing in our fenced backyard while I brought in groceries. The second said I was emotionally abusing them because she heard crying during nap time. Maria's voice grew smaller with each word. Last month she reported that I was denying them adequate nutrition because she saw them eating crackers for an afternoon snack instead of proper food. The pattern was becoming horrifyingly clear. Vanessa didn't just target properties or teenagers, she went after the most vulnerable people in the neighborhood, the ones least equipped to fight back. CPS has investigated me 4 times, Maria continued. 4 times they've come to my house, interviewed my children, examined our living conditions, and found absolutely nothing wrong. But the reports keep coming, and each investigation is more stressful than the last. I thought about Jim's son getting handcuffed on his front lawn, about Mrs. Patterson's 12-year-old grandson crying because he thought loving his grandmother too much was wrong. Now Vanessa was weaponizing child welfare services against an exhausted nurse trying to raise twins alone. The last investigator told me confidentially that someone was filing very detailed reports with specific times and dates, Maria said. Like they were watching my house constantly, documenting every moment they could twist into evidence of neglect. What kind of details? Maria pulled out her own folder. Apparently everyone in the neighborhood had started building cases against Vanessa. She reported that my children were outside unsupervised at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was literally standing 10 feet away, hanging laundry on our back porch. But from her angle, she couldn't see me behind the sheets. The calculated malice was staggering. Vanessa was creating evidence through strategic positioning and willful misinterpretation, just like she'd done with Kevin's photos. I heard someone finally filed HOA violations against her, Maria said quietly. I wanted to thank them, and I wanted them to know that she's been taking pictures of my house from the street. If this escalates, if she gets angry enough. She trailed off, but I understood. An angry Vanessa with nothing left to lose might stop being strategic about her harassment. She might start being desperate. And desperate people make mistakes that expose everything. At 5:45 p.m., I was applying lipstick in my bathroom mirror when my phone exploded with notifications. 7 missed calls from David, 3 from his mother Patricia, and a string of increasingly frantic texts that made my stomach plummet. Asterisk, emergency at mom's house. Come now. Asterisk. Asterisk, Vanessa's lost it completely. Bring the HOA stuff if you have any. Asterisk. Asterisk, private investigator found something. This is bad. Asterisk. I drove the 12 minutes to Patricia's house and ate, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Had the PI somehow identified me as HOA president? Had Vanessa connected my evening walks to the violation reports? When I pulled into the familiar driveway, I could see Vanessa pacing frantically in the living room through the front window, gesticulating wildly while David's father sat stone-faced at the kitchen table. Patricia met me at the door, her usually perfect silver hair disheveled and her eyes wide with panic. Thank God you're here. She's been like this for an hour. Inside, Vanessa was surrounded by printed emails, photographs, and what looked like surveillance equipment. A professional-grade camera with a telephoto lens sat on the coffee table next to stacks of time-stamped photos that made my blood run cold. Pictures of Mrs. Patterson checking her mail. Jim Chen's son Kevin getting into his car. Maria Santos hanging laundry in her backyard. The scope of Vanessa's surveillance operation was far more extensive than I'd imagined. She hired some ex-cop turned PI, Patricia whispered to me. He's been helping her build cases against half the neighborhood for months. David looked up when I entered, his face pale. The investigator found something big. About the HOA violations. Vanessa spun around, her eyes blazing with vindicated fury. The complaints weren't random harassment, they were strategic retaliation. Someone's been systematically targeting me because I've been exposing the real problems in this neighborhood. My mouth went dry. What kind of problems? Drug dealing, child neglect, property fraud, I've documented everything. She grabbed a thick binder labeled Neighborhood Surveillance Log and thrust it at me. Kevin Chen, 17 documented instances of suspicious vehicle traffic at his residence. Maria Santos, 43 instances of inadequate child supervision. Mrs. Patterson, ongoing property maintenance violations and possible insurance fraud regarding her vintage garden structures. I flipped through pages of meticulous notes, time-stamped photographs, and detailed behavioral analyses. Vanessa had been conducting a neighborhood-wide investigation for over a year, convinced she was uncovering criminal activity where normal people saw teenagers visiting friends and mothers doing laundry. The PI confirmed that someone filed all the HOA reports on the same day, Vanessa continued, her voice rising with excitement. Tuesday, October 15th, at 11:47 p.m. Every single violation was submitted within a 20-minute window using the online portal. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. October 15th, the night I'd submitted everything after my evening documentation walk. He traced the IP address, David's father said grimly. It came from somewhere in the neighborhood. Someone within a 6-block radius. Vanessa's smile was triumphant and terrifying. We're going door to door tomorrow. Every house, every resident. Whoever's been orchestrating this harassment campaign against a concerned homeowner is going to face serious legal consequences. David caught my eye across the room, and I saw my own panic reflected in his expression. Neither of us had discussed my HOA role, but he knew me well enough to recognize the guilty terror that must have been written across my face. The PI also discovered something interesting about the timing, Vanessa added, consulting her notes. The violations were filed exactly 47 minutes after I submitted my final CPS report on Maria Santos. Someone was watching, waiting for me to take action so they could retaliate immediately. Pure coincidence, but it sounded damning when presented as evidence of coordination. In 18 hours, Vanessa would start her door-to-door investigation. And I was completely unprepared for what she might uncover. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of strategic planning that made me feel like I was watching my own execution being organized. David's father had his lawyer friend on speakerphone by 7 p.m., discussing harassment by proxy and coordinated intimidation campaigns, while Vanessa spread her surveillance photos across Patricia's mahogany dining table like evidence at a crime scene. The IP trace narrows it down to 43 possible addresses, the lawyer's voice crackled through the phone. But we can eliminate families with young children, elderly residents without tech knowledge, and anyone who's been targeted by the harassment campaign themselves. My fork clattered against my plate. That elimination process would cut the suspect list to maybe 15 houses. Maybe 10. What about renters versus owners? Vanessa asked, making notes in her surveillance binder. Someone filing HOA violations would need intimate knowledge of property regulations. That suggests either a board member or someone with significant homeowner experience. David shot me a concerned look across the table. I'd been pushing food around my plate for 20 minutes, too nauseous to eat while listening to them systematically narrow down the search parameters that would inevitably lead to me. The private investigator wants to examine HOA records tomorrow, David's father continued. Meeting minutes, board member communications, voting records. If there's been any coordination between the complainant and board members, he'll find it. My blood turned to slush. HOA records would show everything: my election as president, my access to the complaint system, my authorization of the compliance inspections. The paper trail was comprehensive and completely damning. I still can't believe someone in our own neighborhood would do this, Patricia said, refilling wine glasses with shaking hands. Vanessa's just been trying to maintain community standards. Why would anyone target her for that? Because she filed false drug reports against a teenager. Because she weaponized CPS against an exhausted single mother. Because she reduced elderly neighbors to tears over dandelion flowers. But I couldn't say any of that without revealing how much I knew about her systematic harassment campaign. Some people resent accountability, Vanessa said, her voice taking on the self-righteous tone I'd learned to dread. They'd rather live in chaos than follow basic community guidelines. My phone buzzed with a text message that made my heart stop. Emergency HOA board meeting called for tomorrow 9 a.m. Compliance issues require immediate attention. Property management. The management company was escalating Vanessa's case to the full board level. Which meant 5 other board members would be reviewing every detail of the violations I'd filed, possibly connecting them to other complaints, definitely creating an official record that the PI could subpoena. The investigator thinks whoever did this might panic and try to withdraw the complaints, the lawyer continued. We're monitoring the HOA portal for any changes to the case files. Any attempt to modify or delete the violations would prove consciousness of guilt. I was trapped. Withdrawing the complaints would confirm my involvement. Leaving them active would destroy my marriage when the truth inevitably came out. Either choice led to the same destination: complete family implosion by the weekend. I need to use the bathroom, I managed, standing on unsteady legs. In Patricia's powder room, I stared at my reflection and tried to figure out how my quest for neighborhood justice had become a family-destroying nightmare in less than 48 hours. Through the thin walls, I could hear Vanessa outlining her door-to-door investigation schedule, David expressing concern about whoever's desperate enough to do this, and his parents discussing legal strategies for prosecuting their unknown enemy. Their unknown enemy who would be sleeping next to their son tonight, probably for the last time before everything exploded. When I returned to the dining room, Vanessa was packing up her surveillance materials with the focused intensity of a general preparing for battle. Tomorrow changes everything, she announced. By Friday, we'll know exactly who's been terrorizing me, and they'll face consequences they never imagined. She was absolutely right. Just not in the way she expected. The emergency HOA board meeting at 9 a.m. felt like walking into my own trial. I sat in the community center conference room, watching 4 other board members review Vanessa's violation case while trying to keep my expression neutral. My co-president's signature was right there on every document, but somehow I had to pretend this was my first time seeing the details. Quite thorough documentation, said Margaret Webb, our treasurer, flipping through the photographs I'd taken. Professional grade measurements, multiple angles, timestamp verification. Whoever filed these complaints knew exactly what they were doing. Board Secretary Tom Rodriguez nodded approvingly. The fence violation alone is ironclad. 14 inches over the setback line with surveyor quality measurements. No wiggle room for appeals. My phone buzzed with increasingly frantic texts from David. Vanessa's been calling neighbors since 7 a.m. Mrs. Patterson hung up on her. She's at the Chen house now. Jim's not answering the door. The investigation was proceeding exactly as Vanessa had promised, and I was trapped in this meeting pretending to review violations I'd personally documented while my sister-in-law systematically alienated every person who might have supported her cause. The complainant clearly has extensive HOA knowledge, continued Margaret. They cited specific regulation numbers, referenced implementation dates, even included decibel readings that align perfectly with our noise ordinances. Vice President Sarah Kim looked up from the noise violation report. Speaking of which, has anyone actually heard this fountain? If it's running past 11 p.m. at 47 decibels, that's a clear violation. But I'm curious how someone got such precise measurements. My throat went dry. Professional sound meter, probably. Exactly what I was thinking, Sarah agreed. The complainant either works in construction, engineering, or property management. Someone with access to specialized equipment. Another text from David, Vanessa's hired a second PI. They're canvassing the neighborhood with some kind of technical equipment. Technical equipment. My stomach plummeted as I realized what they might be doing: signal detection, looking for wireless devices that could have accessed the HOA portal from various locations. If they mapped Wi-Fi networks and cross-referenced them with the October 15th timestamp. We need to schedule the compliance inspection for today, Tom announced, checking his calendar. The 48-hour deadline expires at 11:47 p.m. tonight. What if the homeowner requests an extension? I asked, hoping my voice sounded casual. Margaret laughed. According to her complaint history, Vanessa Morrison has never granted extensions to other residents. She actually argued last year that deadline flexibility encourages non-compliance and disrespects community standards. The irony would have been delicious if I weren't sitting in the middle of it, watching my carefully planned justice transform into a neighborhood investigation that was rapidly spinning beyond anyone's control. My phone rang, Patricia's number. Excuse me for just a moment. Thank God you answered, Patricia whispered into the phone. Vanessa's lost her mind completely. She's got 2 private investigators, some kind of computer expert, and she's demanding to search people's houses for surveillance equipment. The Hendersons called the police because she wouldn't leave their property. Through the conference room window, I could see a white van with tinted windows parked across the street. As I watched, a man with professional-grade camera equipment emerged, followed by Vanessa gesturing wildly toward our community center. She's coming your way, Patricia continued. Something about confronting the HOA board directly. You need to get out of there before. The conference room door burst open, and Vanessa strode in flanked by 2 men in dark suits, her eyes blazing with vindicated fury. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, we found our saboteur. The conference room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Vanessa stood in the doorway like an avenging angel, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled from what must have been hours of door-to-door interrogation. The two private investigators flanked her, one holding a tablet displaying what looked like network analysis data, the other clutching a thick folder that made my palms sweat. "We've traced the IP address to a specific location," she announced, her voice carrying that triumphant edge I'd heard her use when cornering Mrs. Patterson about her wind chimes. "The violations were filed from 2634 Maple Grove Drive using the wireless network, David and Sarah 2019. My blood turned to ice water. Our Wi-Fi network name, the one David had set up 5 years ago when we moved in, combining our names with the year we got married." Margaret Webb looked confused. "I'm sorry, who are you exactly?" "This is a private board meeting." "Vanessa Morrison," she replied, pulling out her surveillance binder with practiced efficiency. "The victim of a coordinated harassment campaign orchestrated by someone sitting at this very table." Tom Rodriguez stood up, his face reddening. "Ma'am, you can't just barge into an official HOA meeting with 2634, Maple Grove Drive," the first investigator interrupted, consulting his tablet. "Registered to David and Sarah Chen." He looked directly at me. "That's you, isn't it, Mrs. Chen?" 5 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and I felt the walls of the conference room shrinking inward. Sarah Kim's expression shifted from confusion to dawning realization, while Margaret's mouth fell open in shock. "Sarah?" Tom's voice carried a note of disbelief. "You filed the violations against Vanessa?" My throat felt like sandpaper. "I can explain. She's been plotting this for months," Vanessa cut in, opening her binder to reveal photographs that made my stomach lurch. Pictures of me walking past her house during my evening documentation sessions. Time-stamped images of me measuring fence lines with Jim's surveyor tape. A telephoto shot of me sitting in my kitchen with my laptop open to what was clearly the HOA management portal. "She's been conducting surveillance on me while pretending to be a concerned neighbor," Vanessa continued, her voice rising with righteous indignation. "Look at this, October 13th, 8:47 p.m., she spent 17 minutes photographing my property from 3 different angles. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Vanessa had been watching me just as carefully as I'd been watching her, building her own case while I built mine. The second investigator has been analyzing complaint patterns," Vanessa said, gesturing to the man with the folder. "Sarah filed violations that perfectly mirror reports I submitted about other residents. She's been systematically retaliating against me for maintaining community standards." Margaret looked between me and the investigators, her expression shifting from shock to disappointment. "Sarah, you're the HOA president. You can't file anonymous complaints against residents you have personal conflicts with." "It's not personal," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "She's been harassing everyone in the neighborhood for 3 years." "Harassing?" Vanessa's laugh was sharp and bitter. "I've been documenting criminal activity, child neglect, and property violations that everyone else was too afraid to address. And instead of thanking me for protecting our community, you decided to abuse your position to silence me." The second investigator opened his folder, revealing what looked like a comprehensive timeline. "The pattern is clear. Every time Mrs. Morrison filed a legitimate complaint, Mrs. Chen retaliated within 48 hours using her HOA authority." "Those weren't retaliations," I said, finding my voice. "Those were actual violations. Your fence is 14 inches over the property line. Your fountain does exceed noise ordinances. Everything I documented is factual." "Factual?" Vanessa's eyes blazed. "You've been stalking me for months, taking pictures of my home, measuring my property with borrowed equipment. That's not official HOA business, that's personal vendetta disguised as governance." Sarah Kim was shaking her head slowly, her disappointment palpable. "Sarah, how could you not disclose your relationship to Vanessa? The conflict of interest alone invalidates everything." The room felt like it was spinning. 3 years of watching Vanessa terrorize our neighbors, months of careful documentation, weeks of planning what felt like perfect justice, and now I was the villain in a story where she emerged as the wrong victim of administrative abuse. My phone buzzed with a text from David, "Coming to get you. Don't say anything else until I'm there." Too late. I'd already said too much, and Vanessa's investigators had said more than enough to destroy everything I'd worked to protect. The silence in the conference room stretched until it became unbearable. Margaret Webb was the first to speak, her voice carefully controlled in that way people use when they're trying not to explode. "Sarah, I need you to explain exactly how long you've known about these violations and why you didn't recuse yourself from any decisions involving your sister-in-law." Before I could answer, Vanessa's second investigator cleared his throat. "There's more. Mrs. Chen accessed the HOA complaint portal 17 times between September 20th and October 15th, always during evening hours. She wasn't just filing violations, she was researching Mrs. Morrison's complaint history, cross-referencing addresses, building profiles on multiple residents." Tom Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "That sounds like stalking, not governance." "It's due diligence," I said desperately. "Vanessa has filed 43 complaints against neighbors in 2 years." I was trying to understand the pattern. "The pattern," Vanessa interrupted, "is that I care about community standards while others enable criminal behavior." She pulled out a fresh stack of photographs. "Mrs. Patterson has been running an unlicensed pet grooming business from her garage. Kevin Chen has been dealing marijuana to high school students. Maria Santos leaves her children unattended for hours while she—" "Stop." The word came out louder than I intended, echoing off the conference room walls. "Just stop lying about these people." Vanessa's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Lying? I have documentation. You have paranoid delusions dressed up as community service." 3 years of suppressed anger finally broke free. "Mrs. Patterson grooms her neighbor's dog once a month as a favor. Kevin Chen hugs his girlfriend goodbye after school. Maria Santos hangs laundry in her backyard while her children play in their fenced yard." "Then explain the search warrant," Vanessa shot back. "Explain why the sheriff's department found cause to investigate drug dealing at the Chen residence." Margaret's face went white. "There was a search warrant." The first investigator nodded grimly. "October 8th, based on Mrs. Morrison's sworn statement and photographic evidence. No contraband was found, but the investigation is ongoing." I watched Tom's expression shift from disappointment to horror as the implications sank in. "Vanessa, you filed false police reports against a 17-year-old. Not false, she insisted. Suspicious activity that required professional investigation. The fact that they didn't find drugs doesn't mean. It means you traumatized a kid and his family based on photographs of teenagers eating snacks, I said, my voice shaking with fury. You had a 17-year-old handcuffed in his driveway because you decided his girlfriend's goodbye hug looked suspicious. Sarah Kim was staring at Vanessa with growing alarm. What about the CPS reports? The investigator mentioned Maria Santos. 6 reports in 8 months, I said before Vanessa could spin it. All unfounded. All dismissed after investigation. But Maria still has to live with the stress of wondering when the next knock on her door will come. I was protecting those children from documented neglect. You were terrorizing a single mother who works night shifts at the hospital to support her family. The words poured out now, unstoppable. You called CPS because you saw 3-year-olds eating crackers instead of proper food for their afternoon snack. You reported her for child abandonment because she stepped inside to answer the phone while they played in their fenced backyard. The room had gone dead silent. Margaret was clutching her pen so tightly her knuckles were white, while Tom stared at Vanessa like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. These are serious accusations, the first investigator said carefully. Mrs. Morrison, do you have documentation supporting your CPS and police reports? Vanessa's confidence faltered slightly. Of course I have documentation. I maintain meticulous records of all neighborhood safety concerns. I'd like to see those records, Margaret said quietly. All of them. Before we continue this discussion about Mrs. Chen's alleged misconduct. For the first time since she'd burst through the door, Vanessa looked uncertain. The room's energy was shifting, and I could see her realizing that her investigators had led her into deeper waters than she'd intended to navigate. My phone rang at that exact moment, David's ringtone cutting through the tension like a knife. Through the conference room window, I could see him pulling into the parking lot, his face grim behind the windshield. Don't answer that, Vanessa said sharply. We're not finished here. But Margaret was already standing, her expression shifting from disappointment to something that looked like protective fury. Actually, I think we are. Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to need you and your investigators to leave while the board discusses this situation privately. Leave. Vanessa's voice climbed an octave. I'm the victim here. Sarah abused her position to retaliate against legitimate community oversight, and you want me to leave? You just admitted to filing police reports that resulted in a teenager being handcuffed in his driveway, Tom said flatly. You filed 43 complaints in 2 years, including CPS reports against a working mother. That's not community oversight, that's harassment. The first investigator cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mrs. Morrison, perhaps we should regroup in. No. Vanessa slammed her hand on the conference table, making everyone jump. I hired you to expose the conspiracy against me, not to watch this board protect their corrupt president. David appeared in the doorway behind the investigators, taking in the scene with rapidly widening eyes. Sarah. What's going on? Your wife, Vanessa turned on him like a cornered animal, has been stalking me for months, abusing her HOA position to file fraudulent violations, and coordinating with neighbors to destroy my reputation. David's gaze moved from Vanessa to the investigators to me, and I watched 3 years of marriage flash in his eyes as he processed what this meant. Sarah's the HOA president. The question hung in the air like smoke. I'd never told him about the election, never mentioned my role in the violations, never explained why I'd been so interested in evening walks that happened to pass Vanessa's house. The betrayal on his face was almost worse than Vanessa's vindicated smile. She didn't tell you. Vanessa's voice dripped with false sympathy. Your own wife has been running a shadow campaign against your sister for months, and she never mentioned it. Margaret stepped between them, her voice commanding. Everyone stop. Mrs. Morrison, you and your team need to leave immediately. This is a private board matter now. Private board matter. Vanessa laughed bitterly. You're protecting a board member who's committed ethics violations, conflict of interest abuse, and harassment. I'll be filing complaints with the state regulatory board by end of business today. The second investigator was already packing his folder, clearly uncomfortable with how the meeting had evolved. Ma'am, we've gathered the information you requested. The rest is outside our scope. Outside your scope. Vanessa whirled on him. I'm paying you to expose corruption, not to. Mrs. Morrison. David's voice cut through her tirade, quiet but sharp. Get out. She stopped mid-sentence, clearly shocked. David had never raised his voice to her, never contradicted her, never been anything but diplomatic during her years of neighborhood terrorism. David, your wife. My wife what? Finally stood up to someone who's been terrorizing our neighbors for 3 years. Who got a 17-year-old kid arrested on false drug charges? Who's been filing bogus CPS reports against a single mother? His voice was rising now, 3 years of suppressed family loyalty finally breaking. Get out of here before I call the police myself. Vanessa's face went through several colors before settling on a shade of red I'd never seen on a human being. Fine. But this isn't over. Not even close. She swept out with her investigators trailing behind, leaving the conference room in stunned silence. Through the window, I watched them get into their white van, Vanessa gesticulating wildly as she talked on her phone. David turned to me, his expression unreadable. HOA president? Really? When were you planning to mention that? The hurt in his voice was worse than anything Vanessa had said. The conference room felt like a tomb after Vanessa's dramatic exit. David stood in the doorway, his face cycling through emotions I'd never seen before, hurt, betrayal, confusion, and something that might have been admiration all warring for dominance. The other board members sat frozen, clearly uncertain whether they just witnessed justice or a complete breakdown of HOA governance. Sarah, Margaret said carefully, we need to discuss your position as president. The conflict of interest issues alone. Can we have a minute? David interrupted, his eyes never leaving mine. Please. Tom and Sarah Kim exchanged glances before gathering their papers. We'll reconvene in 20 minutes, Margaret announced. This situation requires immediate resolution. The door clicked shut, leaving David and me alone with 3 years of unspoken tensions hanging between us like a live wire. HOA president, he repeated, settling into Margaret's vacated chair. When? Last month. The election was by private ballot. That's not what I'm asking. His voice was quiet, which somehow made it worse than if he'd yelled. When were you going to tell your husband that you'd been elected to run our neighborhood association? When were you going to mention that you'd been documenting violations at my sister's house? When exactly was I going to find out that my wife had been living a completely separate life for months? My throat felt raw. It wasn't separate. I was trying to protect our neighbors. By lying to me. David's laugh was bitter. By letting me sit through family dinners while Vanessa complained about some mysterious HOA conspiracy, never once mentioning that my wife was the conspiracy. You would have stopped me. The words hung between us like a confession. Because it was true, if I'd told David about my plans, about the violations I was documenting, about the systematic harassment I'd witnessed, he would have asked me to find another way. He would have suggested family counseling or neighborhood mediation or any of a dozen diplomatic solutions that would have allowed Vanessa to continue terrorizing people while maintaining family harmony. You're damn right I would have stopped you, he said. Do you have any idea what this is going to do to our family? Mom's already called twice this morning asking what's happening. Dad's talking about legal action. Vanessa's hiring private investigators and threatening to sue the entire HOA board. Good, I said, finding my voice. Maybe your family will finally see what she really is. What she really is. David's eyebrows shot up. She's my sister, Sarah. The woman who drove 8 hours when I had appendicitis in college. Who helped me pick out your engagement ring. Who babysits Mom when Dad has his dialysis appointments. His voice cracked slightly. And now you've turned her into some kind of neighborhood villain that my own wife was secretly investigating. I didn't turn her into anything. She filed false drug reports against a 17-year-old, David. She had Kevin Chen handcuffed in his own driveway because she decided teenagers sharing snacks looked like drug deals. David's face went pale. That can't be right. Jim showed me the search warrant. Vanessa's signature was on the sworn statement claiming she had photographic evidence of drug distribution. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the pictures Jim had shared. Look at the evidence, David. Look at what she called suspicious drug activity. I handed him the phone, watching his expression shift as he scrolled through photos of Kevin hugging his girlfriend goodbye, sharing chips with friends during a study group, handing his younger cousin a birthday card. She claimed these photos showed drug transactions, I continued. A goodbye hug became suspicious intimate contact suggesting substance exchange. Kids eating snacks became consumption of suspicious substances. David's hands were shaking as he scrolled through the images. The birthday card. She labeled it transfer of unmarked packages between known associates. The words tasted bitter. Your sister turned a 17-year-old's birthday party into federal drug conspiracy. Jesus. David set the phone down like it might explode. But the police wouldn't have gotten a warrant based on 6 months of carefully documented, suspicious activity. She'd been photographing that kid for half a year, building a case that made normal teenage behavior look criminal. I leaned forward, needing him to understand. This wasn't one mistake, David. This was a sustained campaign of harassment against a high school student whose only crime was dating a girl Vanessa didn't approve of. David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. The CPS reports Maria mentioned. 6 different reports claiming neglect because Maria's children played in their fenced backyard while she hung laundry. Because they ate crackers for snacks instead of proper food. Because she stepped inside to answer the phone for 30 seconds. And Mrs. Patterson. 17 complaints in 2 years. Vanessa wanted her late husband's memorial oak tree removed because the leaves fell on her driveway. My voice broke slightly. She told Mrs. Patterson's 12-year-old grandson that his grandmother was a neighborhood menace who needed to be dealt with appropriately. David looked up at me, his eyes reflecting a grief I'd never seen before. That's not the sister I grew up with. Maybe it is, I said gently. Maybe you just never saw this side because you weren't one of her targets. Through the conference room window, I could see the other board members gathered in the parking lot, clearly giving us space to work through whatever this was. Margaret kept checking her watch. Our 20 minutes were almost up, and decisions needed to be made about my position, about Vanessa's violations, about whether the neighborhood's 3-year nightmare was finally ending or just beginning. David's phone buzzed with a text that made him wince. Mom again. She wants us to come over tonight for an emergency family meeting. Vanessa's told them you've been stalking her. Are you going? He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw him choosing between the sister he'd loved his whole life and the wife who'd been lying to him for months. We're going, he said finally. Together. And you're going to tell them everything you just told me. The emergency family meeting at Patricia's house felt like a tribunal. Vanessa had arrived early, spreading her surveillance materials across the dining table like evidence at a war crimes hearing. David's parents sat stone-faced while she presented her case against me with prosecutorial precision. Sarah has been stalking me for months, Vanessa declared, holding up telephoto photos of me walking past her house. She abused her secret position as HOA president to file retaliatory violations after I reported legitimate safety concerns about our neighbors. Patricia looked at me with wounded eyes. Sarah, how could you do this to family? For 3 years, I'd bitten my tongue at these dinners while Vanessa played the perfect daughter-in-law. But sitting there surrounded by evidence of her systematic harassment campaign, something inside me finally snapped. Show them the rest of your documentation, Vanessa, I said quietly. Show them the photos you used to get Kevin Chen arrested for drug dealing. That's completely different. Show them. My voice was steel. Show them the evidence that got a 17-year-old handcuffed in his driveway. Vanessa's confidence faltered. David's father leaned forward, his expression sharpening. What's this about Kevin being arrested? October 8th, I continued, pulling out the documentation Jim had shared. Search warrant based on Vanessa's sworn statement claiming photographic evidence of drug distribution. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. I spread Jim's photos across the table, the same images that had convinced a judge to authorize a search warrant. Kevin hugging his girlfriend. Teenagers sharing snacks. A birthday card exchange. This is what Vanessa called drug dealing, I said. A goodbye hug became suspicious intimate contact suggesting substance exchange. Kids eating chips became consumption of suspicious substances. David's mother stared at the photos, her face draining of color. Vanessa, you had that sweet boy arrested over hugs. The behavior patterns were suspicious. He's 17. Patricia's voice cracked. He's the same age as your nephew Tommy. David pulled out his phone, scrolling to the CPS documentation Maria had shared. What about this, Vanessa? 6 reports claiming child neglect because Maria Santos hung laundry in her backyard while her twins played in their fenced yard. The room went dead silent as David's parents processed the scope of what Vanessa had been doing. Patricia looked like she might be sick. Those were legitimate safety concerns, Vanessa insisted, but her voice had lost its conviction. Legitimate? David's father's voice was dangerously quiet. You reported a mother for child abandonment because she answered her phone for 30 seconds while her children played outside. And Mrs. Patterson? I added quietly. 17 complaints because you didn't like her late husband's memorial oak tree. You told her 12-year-old grandson that his grandmother was a neighborhood menace. Patricia gasped. You said that to little Tommy? For the first time in 3 years, I watched Vanessa's perfect facade crumble completely. The family she manipulated into seeing her as the victim finally understood who she really was. I was protecting our community, she whispered. You were terrorizing it, David said flatly. And Sarah was the only person brave enough to stop you. 3 hours later, Vanessa's violations remained in effect. The compliance deadline passed at 11:47 p.m. with her fence still 14 inches over the property line. By Monday, she'd face fines of $200 per day until the violations were corrected. But more importantly, the neighborhood finally had peace. Mrs. Patterson's wind chimes played softly in the evening breeze. Kevin Chen parked on the street without looking over his shoulder. Maria Santos hung laundry while her twins laughed in their backyard. And Sunday dinners? Those became infinitely more pleasant once Vanessa moved across town. Sometimes the right thing and the easy thing are completely different paths. I'd chosen carefully, and for the first time in years, our neighborhood felt like home again.